This all of this makes sense, at least a little bit so far. All right, you have any questions around anything? Give you some time to get back to the browser.
I don't have any questions. I've peeked at the Figma a handful of times, and I don't think I've ever looked at it and experienced any confusion. Like, I kind of just understand what all is happening. Um,
Beautiful, thank you.
yeah.
Beautiful, yeah. All right. Yeah, I'll get into a little bit more of the diagram then, I guess. Let me get back to you guys here. Let's see. Yeah, so I guess what is also important here is what you might see as a matrilineal council and advocate council, and this is then this like I said, this overall diagram is very much a replica of oversimplified diagrams in the Gender Justice Research Group when they're describing indigenous modes of organization in their thesis, and we've learned a little bit deeper, even what that research group explains in their thesis of some of the intricacies of autonomy that were spoken to earlier, but also some of the explicit protections for the voices of women in the long-term dynamics of complex dynamics, right? Where there's a possibility in the long term of voices getting drowned out, right? And one of the means that we've seen of the indigenous modes is to have this non-interference, right? It's also a relation to autonomy and authentic peaceful dialogue, authentic distributed power. Is this motif of non-interference, right? Which speaks to autonomy, obviously. But even in the context of decision making, right? No interference in the context of decision making of what would be male title holders and clans, and decision making of female title holders and clans. And there has to be this balance of both in the indigenous protocol. But there also is this coming together of them, right? After there's been this autonomous decision-making processes, right? Enabling for there to actually be dialogue, right? The same way that if there's espionage between nations, if they do come to a table, it's not genuine dialogue or authentic diplomacy anymore because there's been interference in the respective nations' affairs, right? And so there's a similar thing for distributed power at a more granular level in terms of power distribution between men and women, but then also to the edges of these whatever given indigenous matrilineal system that we're talking about, with the function of the well being a big part of this, right? Empowerment all the way to the edges, and this ability to of the women also the clan mothers, right, having this explicit authority to remove the titles of male so-called chiefs or title holders, representatives, when they're not doing that, representing accurately, right? And same thing for clan mothers, right? And it's not this sole authority or final decision. It's in these consensus decision-making processes that include both men and women, include the entirety of the clans and the voices of the nations, all the way to the edges. But it's this explicit protection in the language, the clan mother's authority, right? This protection for the regenerative commons or regenerative sustainability in the social organization, but also which extends to ecosystems, right? That you see in the corn, beans, and the squash, which is an extension of this language of matrilineal, referring to regeneration, right? And abundance, therefore, right at their foundation. And so this is also an important piece to, what will be governance structures, right? Clan design structures, where there's this empowerment, right, all the way to the edges of a system through these motifs of not even a perception of corruption, these motifs of autonomy that are not just lip service in the way they keep coming up, but they keep coming up in actual mechanisms and function in the system design, like the autonomous decision-making processes and so on and so forth, like the well, right? And so, like the fact that you can't campaign to be a title holder, right? You have to be selected through consensus processes because there's a motif of even a perception of corruption isn't allowed, in the title holder position, right? The title can't be tainted, right? There has to be a removal of whoever's corrupting that title, right? But the title can never be corrupted. And so this is something that's really unfamiliar to us in our political systems, but was a motif of checks and balances in the indigenous origins of what we've come to know as democracy or our own representative systems, where we kind of get desensitized to corruption, so to speak, right? And so this is I guess very important parts of the double lines being able to come out of Matrilineal Council or Advocate Council. It would be single lines if it was a boardroom, right? But because of these motifs, because of these functional mechanisms for checks and balances, that get very nuanced, a whole cosmology worth of checks and balances, we can say, right, that we have reciprocity in the flows coming out of the decision making in those nodes of the system, and hopefully, some of the other parts of the system, the diagram, are a little bit more self-explanatory, but there's also the data commons management that I think is usually fairly, it needs some demystification for folks. But I think it speaks to this grander ethos in Stacks Advocates of what Stacks ecosystem is, the ambitious goal that it has, right, in terms of a user-owned internet, and some of the data schemas, that have to be connected to Gaia Hub, Stack storage implementations, right, technology that Stacks uses to ensure that, we can have scalable client-side applications, meaning the data is, pretty much only visible to, the person using the application, and is locked and encrypted before it goes up into the cloud, right? And then decrypted as it comes back down. This is, an important piece to the Stacks ecosystem's, core values of privacy, core values of open source, development and user empowerment, right, in the overall internet architecture. And one of the things that, still hasn't really been figured out and still has to be built and is going to require this constant pursuit of building is an alternative to business models that scrape all of our data in Web 2, right? And monetize it, commodify it, right? Sell it, right? We don't really have a whole lot of robust alternatives to that being under Web 3 as well, right? Which is not conducive to Web 3 values, right? Open source values, Stacks can't be evil values. And so this broader overarching, what is grandiose and ambitious goal, right, that requires constant pursuit is something that, could likely speak to a whole bunch of different projects, even if they're education facing or usually very conventionally consumer facing, right? Applications or, like I said, maybe their education systems coming out of Stacks Advocates, or other specific projects around clarity review, smart contracts, mining, and what have you, right? Excuse me. This can be relevant, right? Like when you think of what makes up your commons, even in somebody who's focused on education, spreading education about stacks, what group of people, your team that you're working with, different projects that are going into it, what makes up your commons, but also what could possibly make up, if you do have any applications in your system design, right? What are some possible data schemas that you can start to build out that contribute to this commons of data schemas that is conducive to not scraping people's data, right? And having business models that find ways of navigating, only knowing how to commodify and sell someone's data to monetize your development, right? And the research and development model of the GovLab, the research and development model of Stacks Advocates, the experimentation, the play, the emergence of it, right? I think maybe some of the answer to how we can find revenue streams and monetary self-sufficiency outside of these conventional, selling of data models, right? You can have research and development around education or marketing or what have you, that pops up as just something advocates want to do in advocates to contribute to the Stacks ecosystem. And this is my attempt of giving some type of concrete example of the having revenue streams come in before you have to think about a conventional model. In a restaurant business, for example, right? If you can, start to apply this language of sustainable development goals, for example, which system design speaks to, right? When you think about diversity, when you speak about ecological rights and this type of language, transitional jobs, even if you're doing research and development around packaging, and there's momentum around this language of green industry, all of a sudden, by the time you get to thinking about prices or the labor that goes into the restaurant, or you've already had a revenue stream coming in, so you no longer have to think about gaining a core base and setting prices or some of the conventional ways of making money in a restaurant business, right? Now you can focus on what you're passionate about in that restaurant business, whether it's the experimentation with food or the bringing together of people, just feeding people, any of these things. And this is a similar thing that can happen, I think, around what is normally a product of education, right? A product of marketing or a product of some type of application. And once you've zoomed out into system design, tapped into markets that are maybe speaking to diversity, or markets that are maybe speaking to ecological sustainability, this is a means of leveraging research and development models as opposed to commodification of data models. So by the time you get to doing what you actually want to do, you can do what you're passionate about in those models, and the users don't have to sacrifice their data, right? And I know this is maybe the most convoluted example that I've tried to explain, but this is really what I'm trying to articulate and really bounce off you guys and make sure it makes sense in terms of this really ambitious goal of alternative models for monetary sufficiency of an entire internet architecture, right? And it's the type of ambitious experimentation, grandiose vision that is, according to all of us here, just by virtue of us being here, believe in, right? We believe in a Web3 architecture and business models to boot that are conducive to can't be evil values. And so, it's it's worth failing at, even if we do, right? Because it's if we don't achieve it, it kind of defeats the purpose of a lot of things that everything that we're doing here as generators of value in the space. And so yeah, I want to shut up now before we zoom out into what's going on in the outer rungs. But that's kind of my attempt to speak to some of the overarching system design ethos that we can carry in the Stacks Advocates, while not being too prescriptive either. And hopefully I tried to, some of the convolution of my of the last 5 minutes, I think, has been in trying to give some concrete examples that show how non-prescriptive it can be, even in some of the more usually conventionally consumer-facing products. If you just zoom out a little bit and find what you're passionate about and what would normally be a product, it's a little bit different than finding your niche as a product, which I know is a conventional approach. But it's finding your passion in the scheme of a meaningful system design, right? And that's some of the reference to sustainable development goals or diversity or some of this other language that has momentum in the broader global economy. But yeah, I'll shut up just to see if some of this makes sense for some of you guys that have maybe heard this a few different ways now. Especially for folks who may have heard it the first time, feel free to tell me that none of that made sense or add some additions to it. But I'll shut up before we continue.
Awkward silence.
Good.
I think that was a good explanation. The thing I think I would like to know a little bit more about, and you did touch on this in previous sessions, but the origin of these designs, right? You mentioned the five nation conspiracy.
Yes.
And I think you mentioned several names, and they all have the same meaning or the same origin anyway. But that's really significant, right? That's it. It is we're using or maybe refinding indigenous knowledge to feed the design we use, or to instruct the design we use.
Yes, yeah. And the names you mentioned, I think, is very telling too, right? Because that string of names, you're right? They are referring to the same people, the same group of people. It's a very specific nation of people within the 5 nations usually. And they're all inaccurate, whether it's Marx, Engels, so-called founding fathers of the United States. There's a lot of the architects of these modern ideologies that we are familiar with, even big aspects of the French Enlightenment. Some of the first language of equality, the first time equality comes into the Latin language in the way that we know it, egalitarian systems, comes out of indigenous critique that reaches the governors of France and into the salons of early French Enlightenment. And whole, nonfiction histories turned into fictional stories that get popular in plays and novels throughout France and Europe as well. Spread some of these original indigenous critiques that have this very non-fictional history that gets spread through fictional reaccounts of it. It's very interesting. history. But it's I say all that to say that when we're working with the Ginyaga Haga of the Five Nations Longhouse Confederacy, and we're using the right name to address them, right? It also speaks to a lot of these protocols and functions that I keep referring to in system design that are intact, that we have access to as well. That may be that for sure other ideologies that we're more familiar with, modes of organization that we're more familiar with, are missing, right? The same way that they missed the accurate terminology for the name of the people that inspired the structures.
Yeah,
So
it's. I think it's also a very logical way of how information gets
beautiful. Thank you. Yeah, well,
gets integrated, right? They were in the time when it was used, they were probably not even hearing half of the things that were being said, right? And they're not ready for it.
Right.
I think it might.
Yeah.
It might help that the world is in a bit different place now, at least.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a beautiful opportunity, right? It's a really a unique point in history in a lot of ways, right? Even this particular council that we're working with, which is down to this council in terms of how intact these protocols are. The Ginyaga Haga actually are who established this oral, living, constitution, that for over 2,500 years, right? Once they established peace, grew out of war. It's recited, right, every 5 years, and the input from the collective during the recital of the oral constitution changes it, or evolves it, or modifies it for the circumstances of that given generation. And it's pretty remarkable, right? That particular history and us having access to it intact, when a lot of the tribal councils and band councils that we usually are more familiar with, especially in terms of the politics, they've lost this, or maybe unintentionally or intentionally walked away from it, right? In some ways. And there's a lot of history tied into that, right? You get these Middle Age scrolls from the 1600s and up to the 1800s. They're renewed, and you see band council in those contracts, right, between Queen of England and relatives that are in positions of power in Canada at the time. That are saying, there's if you're a part of these band councils, right, you get a certain percentage, certain points on all of the extraction out of the hemisphere, right? And so I think this lends itself to what you were saying about a little bit of a different place that we're in, today. These band councils still exist, though. These tribal councils still exist, and I'm pretty sure those points on extraction likely still exist too. And bring a new definition, and I know to myself of what old money is and how it what it really is, and how it still undergirds a lot of our geopolitics in ways that are unseen. And yeah, another big part that I didn't want to mention when you were mentioning the historical significance, right, is the matrilineal council part of the system design, right? Because this is definitely a part that so-called founding fathers weren't ready for. In addition to not having a foundation of slavery, but regenerative commons.
I think matrilineal that refers to the not making the distinction between men and women, right? Or is it more broad?
Yeah. I do believe it is more broad. I think it extends to ecosystems and even solar systems, possibly, right? With some of the astrophysics understandings and the cosmologies. But once you do get to like social organization and the scale of human social organization. It's very much this, but this connection to women and ecosystems, or like I said, these concepts of regenerative systems. But yes, I was referring to particularly, the absence of women's voices in settler colonial systems, right, and the translating of that onto these concepts of federalism, some of these, the organization, right, of the states, and so a big part of the access that we have to this council has been this 201 protocols, that got is the first and only peace treaty of the hemisphere, very intentionally made to transform the settler colonists as they touched down, through a peace treaty that's connected to not any written papers or anything, but they're connected to these indigenous cosmologies of what is called, translated as Great Law of Peace. Like I said, the 201 poem, and all of this, but obviously these are translations, but they are these indigenous cosmologies that the Dutch, the English, French, American settlers all are signatories to, right? Giving the Ginyaga to this day nation-to-nation status, that the band councils don't have once they sign on to them. This particular council, they don't have access to running water or electricity per se, but they can register vessels in international seas, and they are flying their flag on the Sea Shepherd vessels that are involved in whale conservation around the world. And so it's a very powerful sentiment, right? That we have access to these 201 poem working group and councils, the same historical councils that folks like Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson sat on, but they've made a very explicit correction to establish matrilineal voices in the 201 poem, right? As opposed to what happened historically, where there was not really the possibility of having women's voices involved in the dialogue between the settler colonists and the natives, right? And so that's just one point that I did not want to miss when you were speaking about the historical significance of it all.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you for explaining it further. I think there's a lot of how do you say this? I think there's still a lot of very specific terminology, right, in the explanations, and I think it's very helpful to pinpoint those and see if we can get them
Adjustable.
yeah, a bit more explained, maybe for people who are less familiar with the history. I think
Yes.
so. These talks really help in that regard. I like how how you say they really adjust their let's say their plan every 5 years, right? Or the way they
they're all
the way they go about or the way they deal with changes in the world, basically. They have that in their processes. I think that's very familiar, at least for me, from the quality standards and environmental standards, because they also have a circular way of working, right? They make a plan, stick with the plan and do what you planned out, and then evaluate and adjust the plan. So I see a little bit of that too.
Yeah, for sure, and it's ultimately this constitution for peaceful organization across nations, right? Nations that were previously at war. So that's literally what makes up a very, very long oral constitution. So when you're reciting it, it's a very long process. I witnessed one that was shorter, and it was still, upwards of 15 days, and they definitely get as long as a month, and historically maybe longer. But this is a plan of that's taking these cosmological references, extrapolating it into social organization for peace, and it changes, right? Although there are these fundamental points that they hit every time, the interpretation or the realizations about those points that have been passed down for millennia change with each group that is a part of the recital, right? That happens every 5 years on the dot, and that it goes into changing that plan for peace, right? So that it's conducive for the circumstances of the time and the people. So it's a beautiful thing in a lot of ways. Pretty remarkable thing to witness too. You know. And there are recordings of this. They get pretty nasty in terms of quality, but maybe there's a way of getting this out there for folks. We've kind of linked to them before in other research fellowships like Kernel. So I think there's already some resources for folks, but it's a timely thing. It takes some time.
Look those up. I'm not sure if I can listen to 15 days of it, but it'll definitely be cool to get an idea of how that goes.
Yeah, but MetaGov has this GovBase as well. This was supposed to be this database, right, for constitutions, and hopefully we get something in there for folks as well. It's a little bit nice, a little bit better packaged going forward. But yeah, it's some exciting stuff for sure. Yeah. But yeah, unless anybody else has something to touch on before I get to some of these, I think, final parts of what we'll be sharing with Allo to make sure that they have a real good, a similar overview that other folks got. A part of the process as well in the form, Allo, will be asking you to think about, temporarily where you think you most identify, right, in an overall clan system of turtle, wolf, and bear, based on your current understanding of turtle, wolf, and bear, and not feeling so concrete in the decision, the clan designation, because it can change as we get out of the temporary learning phase and grasp these things further. But that'll be a part of why we're having these sessions, is getting some explicit structures, even if they're temporary, getting them down, so that we have some carved paths for bottom-up empowerment. For important decisions coming up, right? Whether it's the move away from SourceCred's algorithm towards credit quate, right? Which is hopefully a lot more clearer for folks and understandable, easier to tinker with and experiment with collectively. Important decisions around the treasury distribution, which we're very fortunate folks haven't put up too much of a fuss in terms of some recent drops because of cool down cycles and whatnot in the stacks pool, the community pool of advocates, right? Also, the further establishment of explicit structures in the selection of representatives for the advocates will be hopefully something that's easier once we are at least all in clans and able to leverage some of the tooling we've been working on for consensus flows between the clans and decision making, which are some of the details of the Matrilineal Council and Advocates Council that you see in the diagram. And so all of this is a big part of what's going on in these sessions, and what's going on in this outer realm actually is something else that, along with establishing those temporary explicit structures, we kind of want to do some culture building or some constitution building of our own, right? In terms of what we're all made up of, right? Constitution in that older sense of the word. Us all having this foundation of ecosystem, kind of needing healthy ecosystems under us as a foundation, but then also going forward into what we're trying to do in this outer rung, and establish some core values between us when it comes to what we're intrinsically motivated by, as opposed to maybe extrinsically pressured by, whether it's money making or some status, obtaining status of some kind, social status, right? What are some really original intrinsic motivations, or what considered hidden capital, right? That we may not know about each other, right? Or know even ourselves that we have this to offer to a given system that is horizontal now. It's not top down. We're usually told, just maybe in how little you're paid or how badly you're treated, that you don't have much to contribute. And so a lot of times we can internalize this about ourselves and project it onto other folks. And it really hampers horizontality, even when you're trying to do it. And it's kind of just built into some of these conventional systems of top-down extraction that we all work and live in, right? And so these activities that are, you can see these kind of clocks, these visuals of clocks, and these questions around, how much of your daily time spent goes to these money motivated, survival motivated, extrinsically motivated, examples of what you're doing throughout the day, right? And then how much of your time, right, would you like to be dedicating to the things that you're actually intrinsically passionate and motivated about? And this comes from a case study in Chiapas, Mexico, where they're trying to establish these horizontal, moneyless economies, right? Because there is no money in Chiapas, Mexico, where this case study was taking place. And so they were trying to establish some visible economics in what is usually invisible, right? Poor people getting by without money, right? And one of the activities that they engaged in to increase horizontality, because the researchers were coming from fairly prestigious New York researcher backgrounds, and they knew that when they're working with these local indigenous women, that when they get down to certain structure building for this economy, certain decisions around this economy, the substance of the project, that the women may not be speaking up as much as they maybe could, or be giving examples of how much they have to contribute, or maybe don't feel like they have as much to contribute as the women coming from the prestigious backgrounds. And so to increase horizontality, they did these activities that essentially allowed this collective inventory taking of a lot of what may be considered hidden capital in terms of what people have as skills, as passions, as motivations as well. And so we have a little bit of a combination of some of the research that is right adjacent to Primo Verde Felipe at Harvard's work, with this artist collective called Dada, where they had this research of as soon as they included in their white paper for their system design, where they say they reference these studies that show as soon as any intrinsic motivation is introduced to a given system, the intrinsic motivations that start to disappear to zero, right? And so they, it's a big part of their system design to make the extrinsic invisible and the intrinsic visible, and to start to track that. And to me, this is a huge overlap with indigenous modes of organization and tracking complex dynamics, tracking the morphology of complex dynamics. And that's really where I think a lot of Turtle, Wolf, and Bear comes in, as these fundamental elements of morphology, of the complex organization of anything, right? Even matter getting its mass, right? We can see that in the cosmology, this intact matrilineal cosmology. And so these activities is a kind of a combination of all of that. Where hopefully in these sessions and kind of experienced a little bit already, but folks start to take note of what everybody has to contribute, and even folks that maybe didn't view it as a whole lot to contribute, then get to view that this is a whole lot to contribute, right? And not only is it a big part of coming into form around these concepts of horizontality, but also there's a big stretch between this moneyless Chiapas case study and this space that we're in, right? Where it's hard not to get hit by money almost, right? And but there is an overlap in that grandiose, ambitious, overarching goal that we have, right? In terms of a decommodifying of our data, a decommodification of our privacy, of our the value that we generate in any given system. We're speaking to devs and venture capitalists and whatnot. So, although it's a reach, there is actual some overlap between these what seem like disparate systems, right? Very poor Chiapas high school and a Web3 space. And I think there's something in terms of us coming into form or coming into some continuity of mind as advocates before you go into this inner realm, right? Where you actually get to plug into the different parts that are going on in the advocates, right? That are actually, as you see under all of these charts, being filled in from your answers in the forms. There'll be more and more of these very project-specific activities that pop up so that folks can get into some of their intrinsic passions, start to see what their teams have to offer for horizontality, and then plug right into team building or prioritization or other important things for organizing further, right, in these respective projects. And so it's not supposed to just be a presentation of the system design, but a place for folks to asynchronously collaborate in these activities, and actually jump into some project building across advocates in a hopefully a very transparent, accessible, visible way. And I know there's a lot of time zones, so that's part of the reason for thinking about what Figma had just released in terms of this whiteboarding like tool, right? They call FigJam. So that's really the gist of the Figma document, and I hope it makes a little bit more sense than it does when you first jump in. This is all open to be changed by folks like yourself that have taken the time out to listen to what the hell it is in the first place. You guys are open. You feel free to change it as much as you think it needs to be changed or should be changed as well. Not just in the addition of respective projects to get added. And over here on the right side, it's just probably a means of us being able to track what temporary clans we've all decided on, even be able to track, the temporary representatives at some point as well. And so it's just some nice visualization. You can bring over some of the charts of intrinsic values to suss out where you might be over time, right? And it might change. But that's pretty much it, the Figma document. And I guess all that's left to ask, is really important to these processes is what you feel like, right? At least temporarily, Aloe. I think you're the only one here that maybe hasn't said so, or because you haven't filled out the form yet. But your current grasp of Turtle, Wolf, and Bear, I know you may be seeing some of the documentation for some time now. Do you have an idea, in no pressure, right, in terms of it being concrete? Do you have an idea of where you might see yourself in the system, the function?
Yeah, I've tried to think about this.
Turtle, Wolf, and
And
Bear.
yeah, I feel like a super even blend across the three, no matter what I read about it or
Mm-hmm.
get from it. And I want to say bear, but I don't know if that's my I don't know if that's because I've been in like a bear season for the past like 2 or 3 years, like calling in that energy like before I knew about you guys. Um
Mm,
I don't, and that's just like I go through animals seasonally through my life, like at different points in my life. I meet different animals in the wild, or they present themselves to me as like something I need to be paying attention to, like lessons to listen to. So I like, when I think about it, I'm like, I don't know if it just is like overlapping in times that I'm feeling this like bear stuff, but I like I don't know if it's the same or if it's like something else, or like I don't know if it's just a coincidence that's where I'm at in my life and my journey with like my spiritual stuff, or maybe it means something. I don't know yet. But I've been deeply conflicted. It like brings me to tears thinking about it. It just reminds me of
mm,
like how little I'm connected with my uh just ancestry. Yeah.
mm. No, no, thank you, Yalo. No, I think, some of my first exposure to this stuff, I have a, black and Mexican background, Mexican on my mother's side, so native, um, an indirect way of saying it. And yeah, I remember feeling a similar thing, right? A disconnection or a loss of clan in a lot of ways, right? Especially when you share how important it was to sustainable organization at one point, right, in our ancestry. And so, no, thank you kindly for sharing. Yeah, it was a fairly vulnerable thing, but yeah, I think your overall sentiment is a familiar one, a common one in these sessions, right? And I think it speaks to the non-prescriptiveness, the lack of dogma in the system design. Um, uh, uh, because there is this memory of all three, kind of built into the system, this dynamic uh, uh, play between them, right? The Longhouse context, right, is yeah, all three clans are in all of us, right? These are fundamental elements of all organization, right? Even the organization of ourselves, and so it's in the indigenous context, it's part of the loss that I know I felt, and maybe for yourself as well, right? You have the matrilineal designation, right? Your mother's clan is the clan that you're in, and so that's your dominant clan by default, right? In that indigenous context, but you know, what is dominant at any given point in time changes, and I know you've heard this in the circumstance in that given system, right? So in a given time, it may make more sense to use your turtle traits that you know are there that you mentioned, right? To use your wolf traits that you know are there, right? If somebody else is filling that role in a given scenario of dialogue or conflict resolution or building, right? And so yeah, I think it's never a negative thing to feel all those different clans, and even in indigenous context, I've mentioned this in the sessions. This kind of this notion that is somewhat familiar to us, I think, right? Working on less dominant, traits that you have, right? Maybe the ones that your mother isn't, right? The clan that so you have to work on your wolf clan. If your mother's bear clan, you should work on your turtle clan, and this gives you some balance, right, as an individual, and I'd assume in your function in a given system, but yeah, just all that to say that I think it's fairly okay. I think it's really okay for you to feel like you feel in terms of feeling all of them, right? And yeah, we'll go with bear for now, and you don't have to feel like it's too concrete. Like I said, we've seen other folks learn these protocols, and the Longhouse implement a temporary learning phase, so folks have time to grasp the concepts of these deeper functions in the clan system before they concretely decide or make it more official. So giving folks a chance to learn So yeah, we're going to be doing a similar thing in advocates for all the same reasons. Also, it gives folks chances to make mistakes in the selection of representatives. Right? It's such a different world where it's illegal to campaign. It's such a different world where you're looking very intentionally for accurate representation of the type of mind, knowing somebody's mind, right? Being a part of why you select them as a representative, as opposed to, all that goes into campaign efforts, right? Politics that we're familiar with. So yeah. Thank you, Ella. Again, I think some of the vulnerabilities you give around some of the question of made this session all the more special. So thank you kindly for the time and ears, enduring my long-windedness.
Thank you for speaking. I have a question that came up as you were just talking. I'm trying to figure out how to word it. Do you think or know? Oh gosh, this is hard to think about. It's just all fresh. Do you think that, like, okay, so there's turtle, wolf, and bear, and like, well, and then there's co-regulation, which is like a magic part of community, and then there's like our systems thinking, like being something that, I don't know, I see it as something that gets passed down generationally. Like, I don't think the way that I think is all of my doing. Like, I think I had some help over time building. I don't know but yeah, I'm wondering if there is, if it's been known as a practice or a logic, like spoken of or unspoken of, for people in connection to be like feeling that energy and shifting it appropriately within themselves to co-regulate within Indigenous spaces. Like, are they, like, do you think people have a sense for how much bear or turtle or wolf, and when they're doing it well, they like adjust accordingly, like when they step into a place and they're like, oh, the balance is a little off here. Like, I'm just wondering if that's something that manifests in healthy, thriving places that, like, I just don't know about. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I can only speak to this fairly indirectly. There's a women's nation or life givers nation that sparked out of a lot of local Quebec women that were in contact with this Indigenous Council a little bit before us, really opening the doors of accessibility that weren't necessarily there to this council and all the intact protocols therein. And just in dialogue with folks who are participating in that women's nation directly, right, and participating in council protocols of decision making with using the clan system and different protocols of decision making that they're learning from the Longhouse. And yes, there's this over time this tracking, right, and I imagine it's not consistent, or it maybe takes generations to really get kind of second nature, so to speak, right? In tracking, what is more conducive to this group of people, not butting heads, right, or different personality types colliding. What are some ways of making sure this is productive still, right? And a lot of that, will come from looking at the different traits and seeing if, okay, maybe there's two people trying to be wolves in this particular scenario, and that's why there's been some stagnation, or some butting of heads, or some not so well melding of personalities. And so it's I think it speaks a lot to conflict resolution, but also, as you mentioned, healthy atmospheres in an Indigenous context where there's this accountability, this accountability to removing what could be super opinionated or personal, blockers, right, to conflict resolution or what have you, and zooming out to the collective, and if it's of the good mind and in the collective of things, right, according to some of this oral constitution, right, that I alluded to earlier, that and protocols, right, that are also a big part of how the different clans interact with each other in decision making, and that ability to kind of zoom out of the individual to the collective, to core values of the collective, to this older sense of constitution, and like validate, right, turtle, is a big part of I think some of what you were referring to, and how folks internalize the clans as they get familiar with them. And well, I don't think we would have, if not for being close to some folks in the Women's Nation, that I'll be able to give, you allude to some of the examples, right? But yeah, thanks for asking, because it's it might be a common question folks have, right, in terms of like how exactly is the clan system supposed to be used, and I think it can get that granular, right, and I think it could probably, similar things can be done at a more meta scale too. So I think, thank you kindly for, it's I think a more nuanced way of tracking morphology in what is it, interpersonal dynamics, right?